2012.
And where did it start and where did it end?
I started in Sarria, which is 100 kilometers from Santiago. In order to be an authentic pilgrim, you have to walk the last 100 kilometers. Walk or bicycle or ride a horse.
and did you ride a horse?
No, but I saw a woman riding a horse.
I wonder how long would it take to do it on a horse? That would be...
Yeah, I don't know.
Depends on how good your horse is, I suppose. And so it ended in Santiago.
Yes.
Very good. And who went with you?
I went with an old friend who we had lived in Spain together in the 60s when we were in college.
Oh, fantastic.
And we had done a lot of traveling, hitchhiking, as you do when you're in college. And we decided that we would do this together. So it was kind of like going back in time and forward at the same time. It was really neat.
And when did you first think about doing it?
In 1964, in my a history class at the University of Madrid,
Oh, wow.
And they told us about it. And we were doing a lot of traveling around. We never got to the Camino, though. And so it was way in the back of my mind. And then the opportunity arose in the early 2000s. So.
And what made the opportunity arise? I mean, was it timing? Was it,
Yeah, I retired, and I found somebody that wanted to do it with me too.
Excellent. So what extent did you view this as a religious experience?
I would call it a spiritual rather than religious. And as I mentioned, I think there's always an element in pilgrimage of going back, like even in your pilgrimage, you're going back to something in history or in your life or something like that, but you're going forward to find it. And so in that sense, it was something I really wanted to do, and because I was with my friend, it felt like we were going back. We returned to a lot of friendly places and friendly ideas that we had had earlier, 40 years earlier, something like that.
Excellent. Well, with that, I'll let you carry on here.
Okay, so how I'm going to organize this a little, I'll give you a little bit about the history of this particular Camino. First of all, raise your hand if you've done the Camino, because I know there's 1, 2, 3, and where's Dan? Anyway, he's out there. Okay, so I know that others have done the Camino too, and I highly recommend it, by the way. So I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this particular pilgrimage, and then I want to talk about the symbols. I have a little show and tell table over there that you could look at afterwards, and then I'll finish by telling you kind of what I think I got out of it. So Santiago, like I said, first heard about it when I was living in Spain, and let's see. So this is a carving of St. James on one of the small churches. You see many representations, of course, of St. James along the way, and in many different ways. I'll show you one that contrasts a lot in a minute. But so here's what we know about St. James. From the Bible, we know that he was one of the apostles, the brother of John, and they were known as the sons of Zebedee, or the sons of thunder. They're the same ones whose mother asked Jesus if they could sit on the right and left-hand side, which is interesting. And then we do know that he was martyred. He was the first apostle to be martyred by Herod Agrippa about 44 AD. And that's all we know from the Bible about him. Then, according to, there's lots of tradition, especially in Spain. After Jesus' death and resurrection, according to tradition, St. James was the one who went to the Iberian Peninsula to spread the gospel. And then he returned to Jerusalem, and then, of course, was martyred. So his disciples took his bones back to Spain, according to tradition, and buried them in the northwest corner of Spain. And I'll show you a map in a minute where his bones are. And then history is silent about St. James for about the next 750 years. And then during that time, the Visigoths came in from the north and chased out the Romans, and then the Moors came up from the south and chased people up and then in about 700, 800, the 7th, 8th century, they began what they called the Reconquista, the reconquest. That is, the Catholics taking back the Iberian Peninsula for Catholicism. And so about that time, St. James came back on the scene miraculously. So here is St. James Matamoros, which means more killer. This is becoming, even in Spain, where they're quite traditional, this is definitely not a PC word anymore, because we don't talk so much about killing Moors. But anyway, around 700, 800, there was a Christian hermit who found some bones in a field out in Galicia, and it was a very starry night. And so what he remembers, he called it, if a bishop came and authorized that those certainly were the bones of St. James. And so naturally he would know. So they built a little chapel, and it had been on a starry night, so Campo de Estrellas would be a field of stars, is how the sky looked to him, and then that became Compostelo. And Santiago, as you know, San Diego, St. James, but Santiago is putting that together. So that's how we get Santiago de Compostela. So the little chapel got bigger and bigger as more people came to worship. He was the patron saint of Spain. He also, as I said, miraculously appeared on his white horse. And helped. He was in battles. They saw him in battles, helping to kill the Moors in the Reconquista. So word spread, and as I said, the pilgrimage got bigger and bigger. And then here are many of the routes where people would walk from wherever they were to the corner of Spain. And I'm going to just reach over here and point. Some of you know more than others about Spain, but so that little red dot, that corner there, that's Galicia, the province of Galicia, and that's Santiago in that corner. And so you can see, so as Paul had told us last week, there was the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, there was the pilgrimage to Rome, and then this became a very popular pilgrimage, a little easier to do, much easier to do than Jerusalem, and for many, easier to do than Rome. And the church sold indulgences, so you could get to heaven faster, or maybe get out of purgatory faster, or whatever, if you made this trek. So the most popular route is called the Camino Frances, the French route, because it starts typically starts just north of the Pyrenees, or in the Pyrenees, just north of the Spanish border. And I'll show you that. So right up there. The name of the traditional town where the Camino Frances starts is, and I'm not good with French pronunciation, so Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, I think. Is that right, Margaret? Close enough, right? And then right across the borderline is Roncesvalles, which you see as the first town, and that's where a lot of people start the Camino. From there, it's 800 kilometers to, so about 500 miles from there to Compostela. But as I said, if you walk the last 100, it has to be the last 100. You can't walk 100 in the middle and have that count. It has to be the last 100. And so we did some by car. We started in Burgos. I think that might be that big building there. Anyway, we started in Burgos and then and went and by car and went to León and went to some other places and then began our trek in Sarria. This is it. This is what they come for. This little chapel grew and grew and grew, and now is a huge and quite beautiful cathedral. And this is where people go. You walk, there's a big, I'll show you this too, right in front of the cathedral is a huge plaza, and it is just so exciting every day. Hundreds of people are pouring into that plaza, and you go back the next day and hundreds more people are pouring in, and they're exhausted and they're tired and they're sweaty, and they come to the center of the plaza and just plop down and hug each other, and it's a very beautiful thing. Because for whatever their reason was, they made it. And they have a lot of blisters too. And then here under the cathedral is the casket holding the bones of St. James, and people pay their respects here. This is in the basement. And then this is on the show and tell table, but the second place, after you've gone to the plaza and seen the bones of St. James, then you go over to the pilgrim's office and you get your Compostela. But first you have to show your passport, and it is stamped for every place, a church, a bar, a coffee shop, overnight stay. They have stamps, and this proves that you've made the trek. And then this is what they give you. It's written in Latin, has your name in Latin. And it basically just tells you that that you have. Let's see. It has phrases in it like it's all in Latin, but the translation, some so-and-so, like Mary Smith, has devoutly visited this most holy temple for reasons of piety. And then in recognition of this, I confer this letter with the seal of the same holy church dated in the year of our Lord. So that's what we get. And then every day there is a pilgrim's mass. And at the Mass, the names of the pilgrims, or if they came in a group, sometimes it'll just be the name of the group or the country they're from. They read those at a certain point in the Mass. But it's a full Mass with communion and singing and passing of the peace and everything. One of the unique things, and it doesn't happen with every pilgrim's Mass. I've been to 3 pilgrim's Masses. On different times. I've been in Spain and in Santiago, and only once did I get to see the Botafumeira swing. And the Botafumeira is a huge censer, censer, that kind of censer. And so it's full of incense, and they swing it, they lift it up on a pulley system. If this plays, I'm going to show you in a second here. And then they swing it back and forth. And then the incense goes everywhere, and they evidently, and they've been doing this since the 11th century, and it was very useful when lots and lots and lots of sweaty pilgrims who had very little access to washing up. So let's see, here we go. Let's see if is it working? That's funny, it was working when... Did it? Oh, yeah. I don't know what I've got it on that. That's too bad. Yeah. When I had it, that's too... Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, you can kind of get... you'll see another picture of it holding still. That little puff of smoke in the middle is kind of covering it, but it goes back and forth across the transept, this part of the cross, and it's just amazing. And just as an aside, my friend that I traveled with, who is very non-religious to the point of being anti-religious, said it was worth the whole Mass to see that. So I got her to sit through the Mass. And okay. Oh, I just had to click that button. Okay. No sound, but there is music playing. But look at that. Isn't that just amazing? I mean, and it's huge. It's as big as me. It weighs as much as I do. Yeah. And you can see it's packed. And this happens every day. Well, I understand in the winter it's not as full. On the years of St. James, that is when St. James's birthday, which is July 25th, when it falls on a Sunday, it's special. They call it one of the years of St. James. And then they have tons of pilgrims in town and at the masses. Okay, now I'll talk about some of the symbols. The scallop shell. And it's ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. And some of you have them, I know, if you walk the Camino. So you carry this on your backpack so people know you're a pilgrim. There's several theories. I actually went to a museum in Santiago and was trying to find this out, and the woman at the museum told me 3 different stories, so nobody totally knows. One of them may be that the pilgrims, you can go on from Santiago to the coast at Finisterre, and then people maybe picked up shells to prove they'd actually made the journey and come back. Maybe that's why. Another one was one time one of the people that Santiago rescued came up out of the ocean covered with shells. And anyway, so you see, this one happens to be embedded in a sidewalk in Santiago, and it helps you lead the way. You follow the shells and yellow arrows, which I'll show you in a minute. And so the shells can be anywhere, made out of anything. This is another symbol that you see along the Camino, the Cross of Santiago. And this is an old cross, and I don't know too much about the origination of it, but they think during the times of the Crusades that this came into being. And it's in Spain. If you receive an honor, it's kind of like being knighted, you get the Cross of Santiago. I don't know if they still do this in the 21st century, but it used to be the honor, and then you would get to wear the cross on your lapel or whatever. Here's the yellow arrow, also a seashell, you'll notice there. On these little markers, they have along the road, there's markers that will say, 75 kilometers or, 66 kilometers, and you're walking along and there's these little markers. And then if you walk into a town and there's like a fork in the road or a turn, you look desperately for the yellow arrows so that you are going to be walking the right direction to get out of town on the right path on the other side. Those of you who've been on the Camino know all about that. It's easy to get lost in a town. Yeah.
I just want to say, you have to be sure that you watch for those. If you get to talk to people,
Yeah.
you meet people from all over the world, and you're so busy talking you don't see it. You could go another mile or something and have to come back and say, where did we get? So you really want to watch them.
Yes. Watch for those arrows, yes. Here's another representation of Santiago. This is in Santiago near the cathedral. This is one of those living statues, this guy that holds still for a long time. But I do this to show you some more of the symbols. The gourd, in the old days, they would have a big wooden staff with a gourd, and the gourd was for your drinking water. And the hat was very typical, kind of like one of these nor'easter hats, with a shell, of course, to show you're a pilgrim, because it rains on the Camino. It isn't always sunny. And so you've got that hat and then a big cape. And then the cape was almost like a sleeping bag. I think I told you, this has been going on since, the 800s, 900s. So a lot of pilgrims with not our fancy backpack stuff. Okay, why walk the Camino? I've talked to a lot of people on the Camino and off, and this is my own list of 7 things, but I think here are some of the reasons. Spiritual, and I'll elaborate on each of them just a bit, but spiritual and religious, a time for reflection and contemplation, the beauty of nature, the physical and mental challenge, connecting with community, with others, connecting with the past, the history and tradition, and then just adventure and fun, trying out new foods, seeing new festivals. So here's spiritual and religious. Here's a holding still picture of the Botafumeiro. This is the traditional reason and the reason of many to come and pay their respects to St. James, and as I said, attend the Pilgrim's Mass. And then along the way, there are, every village has at least one church, if not more, churches and shrines that you can stop and pray and meditate. A time for reflection and contemplation. This is called the Cruz de Hierro, and you can't see it very well. At the very top of that stick, a bit, whatever that is, going up, there is an iron cross at the top. And over the years, people will carry a stone symbolic of something that's weighing on them, and they put it at the foot of the cross. And that's me standing on the pile, but look at the stones. I mean, look at the pile. It's huge. So just reflecting on the things that are weighing you down in life. And then another way to do this, here's another one of the markers. Notice the little seashell there. And people will carry their stones and leave them on a marker. Another way to lay down your burdens and to contemplate. The beauty of nature, you'll see it's just a beautiful walk. And if you, Spain has lots of different biospheres, do we call them? Whatever you call them. But so if you start from the Pyrenees, you know, you've got steep, rugged mountains, and then you go down onto the flat meseta, which is sky in a bowl down to your ankles. Just, you know, it's just flat, flat, flat. And walking all day. And then you get into Galicia, where it's more, a lot like our Northwest. Very beautiful, a lot of natural beauty, a lot of agricultural things going on too, which is very pretty. I think you can identify the cornfield there in front of that woods. And one thing about walking, those of you who are walkers know that you can get close up close and personal. And so you can stop whenever you want and enjoy the beauty of nature. This one actually, that we saw, a friend and I were walking, and she took the picture. She has a better camera than I did. But this was our 1 hour off the path. And the sad thing is, we went way down, down, down. You know, we saw this butterfly bush and talking and everything, and then these workers said something like, esto no es camino, no es camino. And we go, what? So then we had to walk up, up, up. That's the hard part, walking up. As you will see in this picture. So on our first day, we walked, I don't know, 12 miles, which for me, that's a long walk. And it was our first day. And you get to the town of Porto Marín, and this is the only way to get into town. You've just crossed a big bridge, and you have to walk up those steps. and your feet are sore, and you're really tired, and you really don't want to walk up those steps. So the physical challenge and mental. And then, and it can get worse. Yeah, you can get, when just walk, and connecting with others, the community. It's just so joyous when you walk into a little village, and there will be other people walking into that village, and you sit down to have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or whatever, or lunch, and you meet people. And so say you might meet people on a Monday, and then 2 or 3 days, and then they're strangers, you exchange stories, where are you from and stuff. And 2 or 3 days later, you see these people at another village. And it's like you've been best friends your whole life. You hug, and it's like, oh my gosh, what's happened to you? And it's just beautiful. This little village was having a Saints' Day fiesta, and this was the band playing, and then they had a bouncy house, and they had face painting and people dancing, the nice thing about Spain is every town and village has a saint, and they always celebrate their Saints' Day. So pretty much you can be guaranteed you're going to have at least two or three fiestas on your way anytime you're in Spain. Connecting with the past. It is just so, to me, this was a deep thing, just thinking of walking along this trail that were, thousands and thousands of people before you had trod hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And you walk by a Roman bridge or, an old Moorish wall, or it's just so amazing to have the past with you there. And then historical traditions of the past. This is in Leon, and they were, it was probably somebody's Saints' Day. We didn't quite understand exactly what was going on, but once a year, they take out this cross out of the cathedral, and they put it on, this is called a paso. We might call them a float, like a float in the Rose Parade, but it's carried by people. It's on their shoulders, so about 20 people are under that float, and then they walk 10 or 12 paces, and then they stop and set it down. Then they walk 10 or 12 places because it's so heavy. There's a lot of gold on this. Anyway, they walked all the way around the cathedral with this, and you can see it's dark. This started like at 3 in the afternoon. It went all the way around the cathedral, and then they enter through the front door. And that's, those big cathedrals, it's really special when they open the front door of the cathedral. For example, in Santiago, one of the few times they open it is when it's St. James' birthday. Food, adventure and fun and food. This was my first time, not my last time, my first time eating pulpo, which is octopus. And this was in Santiago. This group of singers is called the Tuna, and they are historical. They have a historical tradition from way back again in the Middle Ages, where they were university students, and they sang for their supper. So they would go into the restaurants or bars or into the neighborhoods, play their mandolins and sing songs, traditional songs, and get fed. When I was a student in Spain, they were a lot like fraternities, and the guys would come to our residencia, which is like the girls' dorm, and they would stand under our windows and sing to us. Until the nuns who ran our residencia, one night the nuns invited them in for cookies and cocoa. So most of the time the nuns didn't like those boys, though, coming after us. And Buen Camino, you hear this anytime you pass somebody on the Camino, or somebody's sitting there in their yard watching you walk by, the greeting is Buen Camino, which is, good way, good road. So here are the things that the Camino meant to me, some of the things. I love to walk, and for me, walking is a time of reflecting, and walking for hours at a time. You get into a rhythm, and it's just, you're in a zone. It's just beautiful. And you have time to think about your life journey, and it's like a meditation. The beauty of the surroundings was a constant inspiration, a reminder of God's love. And as I mentioned before, I just felt the timelessness of the Camino, knowing about all those millions of feet that have walked this same path over these same stones. Helps you put your problems in perspective. The joy of the celebration at the square when everybody arrives in front of the cathedral, and just seeing those scores of people, hopping off their bicycles or just flopping down on the ground, speaking different languages, hugging people. It just makes you feel good. And then the very sacred peace and joy of that Pilgrim's Mass in the cathedral with the voices. A nun came ahead of time and taught us some songs to everybody in the room. She did a kind of like Pastor Lori does, repeat, sing and repeat. And so we were all singing, and the incense was rising up, and it made me think of our Holden Village song, Let My Prayers Rise Up like incense before you. So, buen camino.
So I think we have a little bit of time for some questions. Maybe I'll start it off. Okay. How many days did you take, and where did you stay?
Ours was 6 days. The Judy Colinari, who runs Spanish Steps, that was the company that got us set up and everything, she says they've lengthened it to 8 days because people don't get so tired. So we were really trudging, so we did 6 days. And then the nice thing, when I was young, I didn't need to know where I was going to sleep, but I was 60 years old when I did this, or 69 or whatever I was, and I wanted to know where I was going to sleep. So she would arrange. They're called albergues, and casa rural, which means a country house. And so we stayed at those. Always charming, made out of stone. They would serve us a homemade meal at the table. So that was very nice accommodations.
Was that a package then?
Yeah. I also, 2 years later, I used the same Spanish Steps we went from Santiago. We started in Santiago and walked to Finisterre and Murcia. So we walked over to the coast and then up the coast. Because that was also a leg of the Camino, the people who decided to go all the way to the ocean. And Ruth isn't here. She told me she wouldn't be here, but last summer, Ruth Nicodemus and I were in Spain, and we stayed in Finisterre, and we walked the last, couple of hours on that path that takes you to the lighthouse and the end of the world. That's the Finisterre.
So does anybody have any questions, or other people who have done that have any comments they want to make?
Yeah, the comments especially would be fun. Oh, Anne?
I have a question.
Let's do the mic.
Oh.
Okay. Sorry. The university students, the musicians, had something on their capes that looked like maybe patches from places they'd been.
Yeah, and I'm not as familiar with the patches. What I do know that they had that didn't show up so well in the picture is ribbons. They also have on their cape, they'll have ribbons. And supposedly, when I was a student, the girlfriends or an admiring girl would make a ribbon for you. So the guy with the most ribbons wins. But I think the patches may have been from different parts where they had sung, because it's probably a little more commercial. So,
other questions? I was kind of curious, if you don't mind, how much the package cost.
Oh, well, of course, this was 2012.
Understood.
Yeah. It was just, I think, a little over 1,000, and I think now it's, I can't remember what it is. I know I've looked on our website, but I can't remember. Yeah.
And did you travel as a group then?
Yeah, there were about 8 or 10 of us, and we all met at near Sarria in Logroño, I think. Lugo. We met in Lugo, and but then in the morning they would feed us breakfast wherever we were, and then we might not see our friends till the end of the day. but there would be a agreed upon meeting place in case you just couldn't make it, and the two guys, they're guides like, would be there at that meeting place if you needed van support, needed a ride to the next place.
So in your case, then, you were kind of getting one meal a day plus accommodation plus kind of organization?
Actually, breakfast and dinner.
Breakfast and
dinner at the
Okay.
Albergues, and then
You would do
on
whatever
our
you
own for the
wanted
lunch.
for lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I paid for my own octopus.
How was your foot health?
I was lucky. I had no problems. Other people had blisters. One of our guides, Mario, he's an expert blister popper. I actually have a slide of him helping. I would like, oh my gosh, was that in your job description? Yeah, I mean, I've, spent a bit on, got my shoes at REI, got good socks, and I never had a problem.
And then how was the wine?
You know that. Buenísimo.
Yeah.
Michelle.
So Mary, I know you speak Spanish, but how about for people who are non-speaking Spanish visitors?
Sharon could answer that probably, because we've had this conversation.
I took a little bit of Spanish in college, and I kind of try to have a little bit of a quick reminder of how to say some really basic things. However, no matter what I said, no one understood me. But what happened is, when you're up in Galicia, they speak a little different than the Spanish you might speak in Madrid. And so even if I had really good Spanish that would work in Madrid, it might not work up there. In fact, one afternoon, we went to a museum of bees, and we got to learn a lot about bees. They call it international because they were speaking more than one language, Galicia and Spanish, and once in a while English. But they call those two different languages, and they thought it was a very open kind of thing with having all these languages. And we had one person that we knew that mainly spoke Spanish, and then we had a local person from up there who spoke other things. One night we spent a night with the one who speaks Galicia, her house, her parents' house, and they had a bunch of puppies. They had like I think about 10 little puppies, and they slept right outside our door. It was so sweet. They were all cuddled up by them. So the things that happen are things you can never expect. But if you're interested in going on something, if you Google Camino, you'll see lots of different groups that take you.
Also, there's a group in Portland called Portlandia.
That's a very good
No, not Portlandia. What's the name? The Portlandia Camino Walkers is what it's called, Portlandia Camino. And they walk once a month, every third Sunday afternoon or something. They walk for 2 hours, and then they go to a pub. And you can get all kinds of questions answered about backpacks, shoes, whatever, yeah. And you can do this without speaking Spanish. You can.
Yeah, I don't have any direct experience with this, but I've spent a lot of time in Europe in places where I don't speak the language. And I mean, if that's something that's worrying a little bit, let it go. It's a philosophy of just, I'm going to laugh at myself, and I am going to plow through, and I'm going to be an expert in charades, and I will get what I want. And of course, there's a zillion people around who speak English. But I've been in places where that's not the case, where all of a sudden you're in this small town, and there is not a soul who speaks your language. And you figure out how to do it, Usually you're in a situation where the variables are pretty limited. If you're in a restaurant, you probably want food. And so all you're kind of trying to figure out is what food exactly, right? So you can point, or you can just let fate decide and get a new experience, So I really encourage people, step out of your comfort zone a little bit and give it a shot. Yeah, Larry.
When Bonnie and I were on a Rick Steves tour in Ireland, we were in Dingle, Ireland, and there's a St. James Church built by the Spanish in Dingle, and is said to have been pilgrims started out on their journey to Santiago de Compostela to visit the shrine of St. James.
Huh.
They traveled from Dingo by sea to the port of Corona, northern Spain, where they joined others on their route to Compostela.
Huh, yeah. Interesting, huh? Yeah.
There was that map that Mary had at the very beginning with all kinds of routes from all over Europe. And I've seen wider maps where people are coming from Germany and Poland and all kinds of places, you know, all filtering into that one thing. So yeah, people from all over Europe have participated from wherever they are. Yeah.
Okay, well, oh. Maybe one more.
Absolutely.
So when you traveled over there, you probably flew from Portland to somewhere. So can you tell what your route was to get to where you started the Camino?
So that particular year, we flew to Madrid, and then we rented a car, and then because we wanted to do part of the Camino by car, so we picked it up in Madrid, went up to Burgos, León, across, and then dropped it off in Lugo, where we were meeting Judy and the rest of them.
And a lot of people do it without a group too, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can just go on and, you know, all by yourself.
Do they have accommodations in monasteries? I've heard something about that in the context of a pilgrimage.
Yeah, sometimes. I think maybe more in the past than the present. Now they, in any of the villages, in fact, this is out of date now, but one of the things this book tells you is when you get to a town, it lists the albergues in each little village, and so and you just, most of the time you can find a place.
So it sounds like an option is to get a good book and kind of, you know, figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and I've heard, like, if you don't know, it's good to get there early in the afternoon rather than at the end of the day.
On the seaside of Spain, is it Basque?
The Basques are up in the Pyrenees.
So you must be close.
So what I saw from the map
Yeah.
is that the longer traditional route, so before where
Yeah.
you started, would go through
I'll get to it.
Pamplona, which
Yeah.
is definitely
But
Basque
Pamplona,
country.
and Pamplona is Basque country, yeah.
So I'm guessing
Gonna
you
get the map.
started kind of after the Basque country.
Definitely,
if you will.
yeah. Just trying to find that map so you can.
My name
There.
is, my last name is Basque, if you're keeping score.
I didn't. Yes, Navarre. Oh, yes, the provincia of Navarre. So that area all around Roncesvalles and the hills is Basque country, all the way over to Bilbao. Do you see Bilbao and San Sebastian? And then that's the Basque country. Then
Yeah,
it
so-
changes to Asturias, and I'm not sure, and then gets to Galicia.
Yeah, so if you wanted the whole experience, you would definitely get the Basque
Yeah.
area. Yeah. I don't know why this is popping into my head, but Winnemucca, Nevada, I don't know if was settled or has a huge Basque population. And so if you're
Yeah.
interested in getting a little bit about Basque, go down there, go to the Basque restaurant, and
Yeah.
you can have Basque food. It's really interesting. So, yeah.
Okay.
Cindy and I went the same year and month as you did,
Isn't that crazy?
and we went with we didn't have a tour, but we did have a friend with us, and we walked it, and we mostly stayed in pensions or hostels. And it was somewhat risky because we didn't know, but you could always decide if you didn't have a place to stay in that town, just to walk on and find something else. That was, a number of years ago, 10 plus, and it was pretty cheap. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of a number of years ago, I just have, because last year Paul was talking about the millions of people that do the Hajj. So on the Camino, I was looking up statistics around before the pandemic struck, they were up to 200,000 people, and that had like tripled or doubled since, say, the year 2000. So it has gotten really popular in the last couple of decades. And of course, then it went way down during the pandemic, although not zero because you're outdoors, but it's hard to find places to stay. Last year, 2022, they have clocked so far, I think this was an October date, 400,000. So doubled from before the pandemic. So, it might be that stretch might be too crowded to walk.
The other thing that we experience with food is most Spaniards eat around 9 or 10 in the evening. And so when we got into a town that had a restaurant, they had special meals for pilgrims around 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time if we have any last questions, but otherwise I think we'll give Mary a big round of applause. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next week.